In today's video, I'm going to cover ways that you can differentiate yourself and stand out of the crowd as a university graduate. This could also be applicable to people who haven't worked for some time, or alternatively, potentially you might be working in a lower level industry where there are going to be a lot of other people applying for jobs and that level of competition is quite high. So watch through to the end and hopefully you pick up some tips that might be helpful for you. Powerstaff Consulting is a recruitment and executive search firm specialising in professional level roles across a range of different sectors. We are often engaged by our client base, which could be a range of different types of companies, to help them find the right person for technical or managerial roles. But we also will get involved in recruiting some of the more graduate and lower level roles from time to time. So we do determine there's a different sort of interview style that we need to use to try and find the best person for the role. And this video will again talk a little bit about some of the different attributes that are looked for by an interview panel, so you can have the best chance of having the right information to address the interviews in the best possible fashion. Being prepared sounds obvious, but there's actually quite a lot that goes into being prepared if you want to excel at the top level when it comes to the interview panel. You really want to be able to do a number of things prior to an interview that give you the greatest chance for success. So number one, you want to have some sort of idea what kind of questions are you going to be asked. There is a lot of information that you can find that will go through the types of questions that graduates get asked at the interview process, and also just sort of general questions as well. And what you can do once you've had an opportunity to assess these sort of questions and get a feel for what you think you might be most likely asked to answer, then you can bring in someone you trust, maybe someone who's a friend or a family member, who can actually sit down with you and allow you to do a mock interview sort of situation. So here they're going to be looking for things like your body language. They're going to want to look at how you're communicating your responses. They're going to want to look at how long you're taking to get your answer across, and are you actually identifying a response that matches the question, or are you going off track? These are some of the things that they can look at. Also, if there is a structure to the way that you are wanting to answer the question, they can listen and hear if you're actually identifying the right structure and putting that across in your response. And over time you can assess that, get better at that, practice that. So that's a big part of the initial process. Number one is definitely going to be practice. The next part of the process, which is going to be quite important, is looking at research of the individual or individuals that you're going to be meeting with, wherever you can, just to piece together some information about what it is that they've done throughout their career, their level of seniority, what their role is within the business. And you'll probably have a think that they may have certain requirements of this person. They may be looking at this role through a certain lens. So having that information could be good in how you respond to that individual when they're asking those questions. In addition to that, you want to know as much as you can about the business. What is it exactly that they do? What do they sell? How big are they? If you were to put them in the industry, what sort of a tier level business are they? Are they an up and comer? Are they a stagnating business? Are they a dominating player? All these different scenarios are going to be paramount as to the sort of person that they're looking for and the sort of qualities that they're after. So in addition to that, you're going to look at things like, okay, is there information about them in the print media? Is there information in articles, things online? What's been happening with the business over the last couple of years? Their social media accounts, are they being actively used? Can you get a bit of a feel for the culture of the business, how they present themselves visually, as well as the writing that you see across their website? Their values are going to be fairly important, and so you probably want to identify what values you share and how and why, and then you want to articulate that in the interview as much as you can. When you're armed with this information, it's going to make a huge difference in how you respond to the questions that you're being asked. Another way that you can make sure that you're responding in a really good manner is do a little bit of research on, I guess, the best ways to answer questions, behavioural-based interview questions, which a lot of the time that's exactly what you're going to be asked as a graduate. You're looking at certain behaviours that you may have or attributes that you would bring into the workplace to deal with different sorts of circumstances. So there's a thing called the STAR method, which is quite common: situation, task, action, and result. And when you're being asked a question such as that, you break up your response to realistically follow that step-by-step process in the response you give, to identify all the information that they're looking for and put that as well as you can back to the interviewer. Another one is called the PAR or PAR. Basically that one's looking at problem, action, result. It's just realistically combining the situation and the task, but it's probably a little bit easier to remember when you go into these situations. What was the problem? Identifying that, looking at the action you individually took to try and remedy the situation, and then go a step further and say what was the actual result of the work that you did, the tactics that you employed, so that way they can really look at holistically how that situation was handled by yourself, or how it would be handled in a different scenario. One other thing to look at as well is, these interview questions are going to be coming fired at you, but you've also got to fire some back as well. Coming back to the thing I discussed a moment ago, with all this research that you're doing, once you get all that information, you can craft some really well, intelligent, thought out questions, which if you ask a good question of the interviewer, potentially not a standard or generic question, something that takes a bit of thought and that's very particular and unique and tailored for their business, and then you make sure in the interview you get a chance to ask them that sort of question, it's going to be really well received and really help you to stay in a different echelon of candidate. You're not going to be one of the generic candidates that comes through. They're going to be very impressed and put you on a pedestal. So think about going into these interviews through that research, and have something, maybe 3 to 5 questions you have in your back pocket that you bring out when you can at some stage of the interview, and that'll make a huge difference. Within an interview, first impressions make a huge difference. If you don't get that great first impression, you may not have as much time allowed, because they'll make up their mind in the first few seconds. And then everything that you do and every interaction that you have with them is them subconsciously trying to establish whatever it was that they first thought of you. So it's a lot harder to come back if your first impression isn't strong. Make sure that you're wearing clothes that paint you in a good light. You can always overdress a little bit for the role. Wear corporate attire as much as you can for a majority of interviews. Make sure that your clothes are ironed and that your appearance is as good as you can, because that will make a big difference. Also, the buffer time that you're going to need to allow yourself, you probably want to walk into the office about maybe 10 to 15 minutes before the appointment, not earlier than that. And certainly, if you're getting closer to the actual time, it can leave you very stressed, which you don't want to go in there in a rush. You want to allow yourself that buffer time. So map out as much as you can the sort of journey that you're going to have. And if there's going to potentially be an issue with finding something before you leave, like your keys, make sure they're by the door. Make sure you got everything you need ready to go ahead of time, and you allow for the travel time it's going to take. So obviously you can look at Google to see where you're at, where they're at, and how long that's going to be. If you're not driving there and you haven't taken parking into account, maybe you're getting a lift, or maybe you're getting public transport. If you're missing that bus or that train, and you don't factor in enough time, it's really going to either throw off the interview altogether or make it a lot harder for you. So these are some basic but very important factors to take into account. Okay, so if you're doing half a decent role, you're actually at the point of getting through the application, getting past the phone screen, and actually getting in front of the person, either virtually or in person. At this stage, there's a number of things for the interview you've got to take into account. I usually suggest people don't park in the driveway, maybe park down the street. So that way they're not going to be watching you come in and judging you as you're trying to get yourself together, or looking at your car if it isn't the greatest. So also take into account other things like when you go in there, you want to make sure that you're on point. You meet the receptionist, you're very friendly, you announce who you're there to speak to, why you're there. You want to make sure that if they're taking you into the interview room, perhaps you wait to be seated before you just sit down and pick a seat. You want to also look at when you're actually in the interview itself, when you're answering questions, making sure that there's some energy, there's some enthusiasm about you. Make sure that when you're talking about things, you're trying to be positive as much as you can. And if you are talking about negative experiences or past employers, again, try not to over embellish on the negativity, because there are ways to be able to state the facts and then move on as to maybe why you left a role or certain gaps in your resume, etc. Where you can, try and be forthcoming, and basically make sure you adhere some of these basic principles if you want to be able to make a good impression. Something else to think about, the body language that you're projecting subconsciously is going to have some sort of impact on how they're taking on what you're saying. So, you want to have the eye contact and you want to share that across the interview panel. You want to make sure that you're trying to sit upwards in your seat. You're mindful of moving yourself around with your hands being jittery. Trying to articulate your responses nice and slowly and clearly, staying on track, and making sure that you give it full attention. If you don't understand something, you can always ask them to repeat it. If you don't know the answer, you can always ask to come back to it. And if you haven't done something, you can just be honest and say, I haven't done it, but if I did, or if I was faced with this situation, this is what I would do. As a graduate, you're going to be assessed on a few things. You're going to be looked at, what are your academic qualifications? Also, you'll be looked at things such as, what are your communication skills? Communication skills are going to be huge in how they view you as a potential candidate. And then obviously if there's additional experience that you bring to the table, that'll all be factored into the scenario. But one other thing that you really want to get across is you want to come in there in your mind prepared with what are your career ambitions? What are you motivated by? What are your passions? And you want to be able to try and, where possible, will be true to that, but also make sure that that's tailored where possible for the circumstances for which you're interviewing. Because if you're firing away ambitions that you haven't really thought of, it's going to look wishy-washy and it's going to probably have some red flags. Also, if you do come up with some really strong and quite specific motivations, if that doesn't relate to the business that they have or the potential within the business, they may think, okay, well, this person's not going to be happy here. We're going to put a cross through them because they're not the right fit for the position. So again, that's where the research comes in. That's where the prior thought comes in. That's where you're looking at the job and asking questions around that. But make sure you've got something. Don't go in there with no idea as to how you're going to respond to that question. Make sure that if you have built that rapport, which is great, the next step is looking at, okay, I've got to be careful now. I can't be too confident, too casual in the way I leave things and potentially trip up and say something wrong. So you've got to leave in a really strong way. It's, in my opinion, almost as, if not as important as the very start of the first impression. That closing impression is critical. You've got all that work in. Now it's time to close the deal. Again, this video is a bit about how you can maybe be a bit different than all the other people applying the job, some of the other people in the interview process. That little touch that you do at the end can help you really probably nail that home that you're the right person for the role. A lot of the time people probably wouldn't go the effort of maybe sending an email after a meeting within about 24 hours to say, look, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the interview. The reason that I'm interested in this role is because of this, this and this. The reasons that I think that I'm the right person for the role is this, this and this. I really look forward to your response, and hope to speak to you soon. That email, if you don't get many of those, it's going to be a differentiator. Every little differentiator you can get, especially in the closing stages, will be really helpful. So try to use things like that just to be able to do something a bit different, and then make sure that you jump outside the crowd. You may not get all the jobs you apply for. You may not get all the offers that eventuate from interviews that you've gone to. It's all a learning process. It's all helpful. The more experience and practice you get at it, the better. But certainly, in the situation that you don't get the job and you need to apply for more jobs, there are a few things you can do yet again to try and be a little bit different. So there's going to be potentially a lot of people applying for these jobs, and then just sending through a job application and hoping that you're going to be miraculously hired for the role. Sometimes it's just not going to be enough. So, in order to be able to help to identify you among the group of candidates as someone that they should bring in for an interview, sometimes just a piece of paper doesn't do the trick. Sometimes it can be beneficial to speak to the hiring manager directly, and if it's either in a situation where there's an active job, sometimes their name might be in an advert. Sometimes it won't be. Sometimes you can call up. If you do call up, you have to make sure that you really deliver a succinct message to that person, who you are, why you're calling. You don't want to go on too long. You want to get your name out there. You want to make sure they've got the application, and you want to put a personality and a voice behind that application and show some interest. It may be enough just to get you to that next step, but maybe you're just trying to get into a business. So you have to map out your industry. You have to look at, okay, who are the key players? And then you'll probably find, if they're a medium to large business, there'll be a talent acquisition person in that business. You can find them on Zoom Info. You can find them on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out to these people, it could be a good way of just building a relationship with them. A lot of people won't go that effort, and sometimes it may not have an immediate response, but sometimes a little further down the track it can produce benefit. Sometimes you can ask if they have time. You just want to shout them to a coffee and just learn a bit more about their business, and also tell them a little bit more about yourself. Sometimes they'll be happy to do so, and they may either refer you in another person in the industry, or they'll keep you in mind when a position is available. So these are some of the things you can do. The smaller businesses, they may not have a HR person, or they may not have a talent acquisition specialist within the business. You may be trying to map out the directors' names in that situation. But just be sure when you are speaking to them, you put thought into it, you've tailored it to that business, and then you deliver that message with a particular reason. You don't want to just say, hi, this is me. You want to make sure that, I want to make sure you know me. I want to apply for this role. I would love to invite you to a coffee so we can have this conversation. Have a reason for calling, deliver the message quickly, get to the point, and make sure that you do so when they're prepared to talk to you at the right time. If they're not, ask to call back at a time when they might be available. If you're dealing with recruitment agencies, be a bit mindful that you're managing your personal brand. So if you're applying to positions or you're contacting these different companies directly, there will be potentially an issue with the agency representing you, at least for a period of time. So map out everywhere that you're applying. Try and be honest with the agencies as to if you've applied somewhere, and that way they're not going to double up with your application. And be mindful if there's certain sorts of business that you want to just start approaching. Maybe in some circumstances it may be better to talk to a recruiter who specialises in that geography and that industry first, see where the relationships are, to see where those vacancies are. Because sometimes, especially when you're at a lower level, having a recruiter be an advocate for you can make a huge difference. So really build a strong relationship with those specialist recruiters. Ideally not too many, maybe have one or two, and that way they can work on your behalf. But if you are going to apply to roles directly, you may not be able to deal with that particular agency, with that particular company when a position does come up. So that sums up information to help graduates and maybe people who are fresh to the job market or junior candidates or people working in high volume sectors where there's a lot of job applications, some tips and tricks to be able to better position themselves to get their ideal job. If you like the video, if you're looking for a job, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and also if you'd like to follow us on some of our other social accounts like our LinkedIn, our Facebook, our Instagram, etc. Also, if you're looking for a job, don't be shy, get in touch with myself or the rest of the team, and hopefully we can help you out. See you in the next video.